We want people to thrive, not survive. Midlife should be a really exciting second chapter, but if you feel rubbish, then you just can't enjoy it. I'm 55 now, but rewind to when I was 43 years old. I was a busy mum, 4 kids, managing my life pretty well. But then over a sort of 4-year period, I started to not feel like myself. I became a shell of a woman. I went to see someone who works with at UCH, and within 10 minutes of me telling her about my symptoms, she said, well, your estrogen levels are on the floor. It was classic perimenopause. So I turned to Facebook and no one was talking about it there, so I thought I'll set up a Facebook group and see, if anyone else is going through this. And that night, so 24 hours, I had 1,000 member requests, and I was like, I'm not alone, this is happening to a lot of people. A press release was based on a flawed trial, basically, linking HRT to breast cancer. And overnight, all these women who were doing brilliantly on it came off it and stopped prescribing it. So you've got this 20 years, 2 decades of doctors coming out of medical school thinking, we can't prescribe it, they'll get cancer. Women terrified now. However many times you say it was a flawed trial and you show the latest updates, people just don't want to believe it.
Katie, how do you think the conversation has changed?
We're in a much better place in terms of awareness now.
And is menopause still a taboo topic?
It is still very much taboo. I think we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go.
Welcome to Grit and Grace with me, Debbie Wosskow. In this series, I'll be chatting to a whole host of incredible guests to discuss the unique challenges, triumphs, and transformative experiences that often define us as women in midlife. Through shared personal stories and advice, we're going to tackle some of the most important and relevant women's issues to date. I see this as more than just a podcast. It's a movement to change the narrative around midlife, so that women see their second act as a time of opportunity, renewal, and excitement. So join me, Debbie Wosskow, on this journey of grit and grace, sponsored by the Better Menopause, science-driven solutions for women in menopause. She is the founder of the Latte Lounge, a vibrant online community that supports women in midlife to navigate perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. Driven by her personal health journey, she's become a leading advocate for raising awareness, providing support, and breaking the stigma around menopause. Through her work, she has created a trusted space for women to embrace midlife with confidence, and she is also celebrating the launch of her first book, Midlife Matters. Welcome to Grit and Grace, Katie Taylor. Katie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to me about the Latte Lounge, which was really driven by your personal experience of perimenopause and menopause. How did it all begin?
Well, I'm 55 now, but rewind to when I was 43 years old. I was a busy mum, 4 kids, managing my life pretty well. I was working for a children's charity, and life was good and happily married. But then over a sort of 4-year period, so from the ages of 43 to 47, I started to not feel like myself. I felt a whole sort of range of seemingly unrelated symptoms which kind of really affected my life. So I was not sleeping, I had this terrible brain fog, very, very low mood, crying spells. Walking my children to school before going to work felt very much like I was climbing a mountain, and anxiety, heart palpitations, all these sort of weird symptoms. And I put it down to just being very busy and not sleeping and maybe not taking care of myself. And that kind of went on at the beginning for a few months, but it really started to impact my work. I couldn't read a budget, I couldn't concentrate in work, I just felt awful. And so I kept going back and forward to my GP, and they kept saying, look, you're a midlife mum, you're very busy, you're juggling too much, why don't you try and work less, or perhaps get fitter or lose more weight? You're probably depressed, take some antidepressants. Now, I'm a doctor's daughter, and I'm very relaxed about health, and I know when I think things are worth taking and when I agree with the doctor. And I just said, this doesn't add up, there's no reason for me to be depressed. And they said, well, that's all you can do. So I carried on. I was still having periods. I didn't have hot flushes, but I got to a point where I just couldn't function. And this went on to a point where I left my job and I became a shell of a woman. I lay on the couch all day. I couldn't walk the kids to school. I started getting very, very heavy bleeding to a point where I was severely anemic. Eventually, I went crying round to my father, who is Professor Michael Baum. He's now a retired breast cancer specialist. And I said, Dad, I think I'm going mad. I think I'm a hypochondriac. I've got no joy in life. I just don't know where I am anymore. And he said, look, you know, maybe this is hormones. You know, I know you haven't had hot flushes. I know you're still having periods, but let's go and see a gynecologist who specialises in menopause. So I went to see someone he works with at UCH, and within 10 minutes of me telling her about my symptoms, she said, well, your estrogen levels are on the floor. It was classic perimenopause. Now, in those days, this was 2016, you know, no one was talking about this, so this was like a massive light bulb moment to me, and I was like, you mean everything I've been experiencing is just because my estrogen levels are plummeting? And she said, yeah. So she prescribed hormone replacement therapy, HRT, which for me was what I needed. And I went home that night and I cried with relief on my bed that I wasn't going completely mad. And then I got angry and I thought, why did nobody tell me this? You know, I've left my job, I've been a terrible mother and wife. So I turned to Facebook because in those days Facebook was the only social media available and no one was talking about it there. So I thought I'll set up a Facebook group and see, you know, if anyone else is going through this. And that night, so 24 hours, I had 1,000 member requests and I was like, oh my God, okay, I'm not alone. This is happening to a lot of people. So that it started very much as a Facebook group, and I called it the Latte Lounge because some of the best conversations I have with my girlfriends where we sort out each other's problems happy in a coffee shop, and I wanted it to feel a kind of sort of a friendly coffee shop environment. And then these women were coming with not just perimenopause and menopause issues, but everything. You know, my husband doesn't love me anymore. Why is my sex drive so bad? My kids are a nightmare. You know, my parents need to go into a care home. So I think because my background's in marketing and comms, I thought, right, well, I've got a network of doctors that I can tap into because my father's one of 5 and they're all doctors, professors, and I just thought I need to get experts on board and build a website. And then, so really, you know, the whole point of it was to support, inform, and then signpost to evidence-based information by leading experts.
Katie, how do you think the conversation has changed since 2016, so almost a decade on? Reflect on that a little bit and your own experience, the experience of your community and how you've seen advocacy and debate develop.
Well, what happened was, so when I started the Facebook group, I came across a wonderful lady called Diane Danzybrink, and Diane is a menopause specialist nurse counsellor, and I asked her if she would help me support these women, and she had also set up her own Facebook group, which was also in those days fairly small compared to how it is now. And Diane's experience took her to an even darker place. She was in surgical menopause. In fact, we both had a hysterectomy, but she wasn't given estrogen and she almost took her own life. And so she was determined, a bit like myself, to make sure no one else would go through this. And so Diane set up a campaign called the #MakeMenopauseMatter campaign. And the 3 campaign aims were to make sure that menopause was on the medical school curriculum, because crazily enough it wasn't. All children in secondary school learn about menopause. Again, it wasn't on the secondary school curriculum, and for workplace policies to be in place. And in 2018, this was presented to up in Parliament, and I went up with Diane, and we've been going back and forward to Westminster for years, trying to campaign and get these campaign aims met. And so through, a lot of fantastic grassroots sort of supporters like Diane and myself and many others, and fantastic menopause specialists and everyone really starting to share their own stories, this sort of it sort of grew and it grew, and then obviously the Davina McCall documentary, it kind of then skyrocketed from there. So I think we're in a much better place in terms of awareness now, thanks to, you know, so many amazing campaigners. There's still a lot to do, but we're certainly ahead of the curve compared to the rest of the world.
And is menopause still a taboo topic?
Depends who you talk to. You know, I think in my sort of very narrow vision world, no, because we literally talk about everything, you know, things that no one wants to talk about. The most embarrassing subjects, you know, vaginal dryness, which I like to say a lot, and it's very embarrassing for people to hear. But if we don't say it and we don't talk about it and don't normalise it, then people carry on suffering in silence. But, you know, low libido, that kind of thing, UTIs, you know, it sounds very unglamorous, but it's important to talk about it. However, we must remember there are people all over the country and the world who aren't on social media, who aren't digitally savvy, who are perhaps older and who wouldn't know where to go, or just don't have the money or capability or connection. So, you know, it is still very much taboo. And I know because I get those emails in my inbox. They're the women who don't talk in the group, but they somehow find me or other women. And we get these really devastating emails. It is taboo, and it must change because women are leaving the workforce at the peak of their careers. And it's crazy. So I think we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go.
What symptoms do you hear about most from your community? And you mentioned when you talked about your own experience that you weren't getting hot flushes or hot flashes, as our American sisters call them. Do you think that the symptom list tends to focus on things that not every woman has? And what do you hear women talking most about? Is it physical? Is it emotional? Is it mental? You know, there are 48 documented menopause symptoms. What do you hear about the most?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say 48 because in the early days we used to say 34, and then suddenly, you know, you'd hear about tendinitis and itchy skin, and suddenly, you know, we're now up to probably 50. And the bottom line is, just for anyone listening and watching, we've got estrogen receptors all over our body. So if your estrogen levels plummet or completely depleted, of course you're going to start feeling all these symptoms. The most troubling ones that we hear is brain fog, for sure, because when you can't think clearly, you can't function. Insomnia is a terrible one. I mean, I was surviving on 1 hour's sleep a night and then dragging myself through my day. And when you're exhausted and emotionally drained, you comfort eat and then you put on weight and then you don't want to exercise. So they are, you know, two of the worst ones that people say all the time. But again, you know, the low libido affects relationships, you know, vaginal dryness to a point where people are in so much agony, but they're so embarrassed that they wouldn't dream of asking for help. So, I mean, the list goes on. We've got a symptom checklist, like so many other people, on our website. And I always say to women, print it off, keep a track and take it to your doctor and say, you know, I'm struggling with this, this and this. Could it be perimenopause or menopause?
What are the most common misconceptions about menopause that you come across or you run into in your campaigning work?
Well, two things. I mean, a lot of the problem that's happened is the gatekeepers to our health are our GPs. And in 2002, there was this Women's Health Initiative trial where it was a million women study, and a press release was leaked based on a flawed trial, basically linking HRT to breast cancer and other diseases too. And overnight, all these women who were doing brilliantly on it, you know, and it was, and all the doctors who were very confident in prescribing came off it and stopped prescribing it. So you've got this 20 years, 2 decades of, first of all, doctors coming out of medical school thinking we can't prescribe it, they'll get cancer. Women terrified now, absolutely terrified, still to this day. And then not only that, but it's like, however many times you say it was a flawed trial and you show that the latest updates, people just don't, it's strange, they just don't want to believe it. And I think there's also a lot of women that will say, oh, well, we went through it, we're fine. Why are you over-medicalising it? And I always say, look, there'll be many women who are fine, and I'm so delighted for you. but let's not belittle the ones who are struggling. And there are lots you can do. I'm not saying HRT is for everyone, and many women can't or don't want to take it, but let's take it seriously. And I think, you know, it's the way that women are dismissed by their doctors, which I find the most upsetting. Doctors are very well-meaning. I'm from a medical family. I think they are the most amazing humans, that, you know, that they dedicate their life to this. However, they only have a 10-minute appointment. And so I would say to all of them, if you don't know, please do the catch-up training, because 51% of the population are going to need you. And it's not rocket science. If I can diagnose it, you certainly can.
As chair of the Better Menopause, we hear a lot from our community about sex, or lack of it, or lack of sex drive. Talk to me a bit about that, and what you hear, and what you hear from women, and how that makes women feel, and how that manifests itself in the life of midlife women.
Well, I think a lot of women think it's just them. Like everything in menopause, they think, oh, it's only happening to them. And it's hard, because if you're not communicating to your partner, or you don't know that the reason you have low libido or uncomfortable sex is because of your hormones, your relationship can break down. And a lot of relationships, the highest rate of divorce and sadly suicide in women is midlife. There's not a coincidence. There's a natural, obvious reason for that. And I think there's a lot you can do. For women who are on HRT, if their hormone levels are balanced, go and have a chat with your doctor. And if they think adding testosterone might help, then that's a conversation definitely worth having. It doesn't help everyone. Some women find it helps, others don't. But there's lots you can do. There's lots of, you know, lubricants out there that can really help. Vaginal estrogen, pessaries. So just make sure that if you're struggling, A, talk to your partner. B, you know, ask your GP about, you know, what you can do to help you. But keep the lines of communication open, because otherwise, you know, you're going to have problems, sadly.
Weight gain is, I would say, the symptom that we hear most about in our Better Menopause family, and for that reason we have launched a new product called the Better Metabolism, which is really focused on this huge topic of women managing their weight and well-being in midlife. How has that been for you, and what do you hear about other women managing that?
I mean, it's probably, other than I feel low and I'm not sleeping, it's up there in our Facebook group every day. I gained a lot of weight, not because I didn't know how to eat well, and not because I wasn't moving, because I was so depressed, and I almost was scared of leaving my house. So if you're sitting on the couch all day and you've got no energy, and you comfort eat because you feel nothing, I felt no emotions. It was numb. I couldn't connect to anything. I'd be watching something on TV which normally I'd find funny, and I wasn't laughing, and so it was almost like I was comfort eating really unhealthy food to try and feel something. And that's the same from so many women. And you get into the vicious circle. The more you eat, the more you don't want to exercise. The more you don't want to exercise, the more weight you put on, and then you feel horrible. And so I always say, you kind of come at this circle from different angles. I had tried to lose weight and I tried to get fit, but I had no energy to do it. But as soon as my hormones were replaced and I started to feel joy again, I was just energized. I was sleeping, therefore I was happy. And I then started engaging in fitness and healthy eating again. And we hear that all the time throughout. And look, I'm not perfect. I have had times since my diagnosis where I've managed to lose weight and feel fantastic. And then there's been the last few years in particular, we've had personally a really tricky sort of family time. And yes, I haven't been looking after myself, but I think midlife women put themselves at the bottom of the pile because we've got a lot of responsibilities. And so I just say to women, don't beat yourself out, because we're all human and sometimes you just don't have that time to look after yourself.
How do you think workplaces can better support women in menopause?
I mean, it's one of my most favourite things to do, is giving talks in menopause workplaces, because it's giving employers and employees that light bulb moment. So there's lots of really simple things to do. So for example, we do talks where I'll put a panel together. So I might share my story, and then we might bring in a menopause doctor who will talk about symptoms and treatment options. And then we might have, say, a staff member who shares their story. And what that does is you're bringing it into the workplace in a very safe environment. You're opening these conversations up. And then what I found in these talks is that it's the men who ask the questions, actually. The women are sitting there nodding, and the men are like, oh, that's what my wife or my partner's going through. Oh, that's why, Sally asked if she could, leave early. And it opens the conversation, and then after that, we work with employers. Lots of people do this now. Help them write policies so that it's almost like a promise to their team that if you're struggling, this is what we have in place to support you. And there's a lot of really forward-thinking companies now who are actually taking out support behind the scenes.
What group do you think is still underrepresented in menopause, in your opinion?
Well, look, I think the sort of minority communities struggle a lot. The Black and Asian community in particular, the symptoms start a bit later, and even in the very religious Jewish communities where women, just don't feel they can talk about these taboo subjects. And I think, it needs to be handled sensitively, because there's a lot of sort of religious observant practices that you might not think about. For example, can I wear an HRT patch during Ramadan? Or, if I'm fasting during Yom Kippur, can I take my, menopause, if you're on a pill or a supplement? So I think we still need to do a lot of work with these minority communities because at the end of the day, we're all going to go through it. It doesn't matter, who you are or where you're from or what you believe in.
Katie, you have been a fantastic advocate for women in menopause, and you've recently written a book that does exactly that. Talk to me a bit about the book and why it's important for women to advocate for themselves and their own health.
Yeah, so I've got a copy of the book here. It's called Midlife Matters, and I wanted it to be a book not just about menopause. It starts with menopause because that's how my journey began. But what I wanted to bring into the book, and also to support, and it's how I support our community, is to bring all that expert knowledge that I've had over the last 10 years almost into one place. And so, because I always say, once your hormones are balanced, you can then get on with the rest of your life. And we want people to thrive, not survive. Midlife should be a really exciting second chapter. But if you feel rubbish, then you just can't enjoy it. So in this book, I've literally covered everything, not just about menopause. It's split into 4 sections. There's a whole section on health, and that's heart health, bone health, which we didn't talk about actually, but I meant to say, bone strengthening exercises are so important.
What are bone strengthening exercises? Explain.
Yeah, so like resistance training, and that can be very simple with weights at home or resistant bands, or I love things like reformer Pilates, just anything that you're sort of working your bone against resistance, because we lose a lot of bone, through menopause, and osteoporosis is a really important thing to make sure you don't end up with. So in the book it covers every sort of health issue that a midlife woman might want or need to know about. We cover gynecological cancers and breast cancers, but then a lot of the second section's on well-being, so it's self-care, and that can be nutrition, fitness, beauty, style. I'm trying to think now off the top of my head, but there's so much in there. And then we cover sex and relationships, that's not just about partners. We talk about friendships, we talk about single life and dating, caring for aging parents, which is a huge responsibility for a lot of us. Grief, which no one talks about really, is another taboo subject. And then the last section is about work and finances. So how to make a career pivot, or how to retrain and go back to work and find your confidence, and managing finances. So I wanted to create a midlife Bible, actually, the sort of book I would want for my 40th birthday, so that, throughout the next 20 years, 25 years, I can dip in and out of it and find the answers from leading experts that I would want to know to then just get on and enjoy my life. Yeah.
Fantastic. Talk a bit about the role that nutrition and exercise and supplements play in managing midlife, and how they're covered in your book, and how your community see those topics.
Well, look, I always say that never think of, if you do need or want HRT, never think of it as a magic bullet. It's not. It will help those who are really struggling with symptoms. Absolutely, it helped me. But, good nutrition is absolutely vital. Gut health, which we haven't talked about. There's a fantastic chapter in the book on gut health written by Sophie Medlin, who is a dietitian over here. A fantastic section. It was reading her section in particular, as well as Jackie Lynch, who's written the nutrition section. It was another light bulb moment for me, because you have to learn to eat a bit differently. It's about putting more of the right food in, not eating less. We've grown up, well, especially me, you're younger than me, but in the 80s it was that whole diet culture and counting calories and restricting fats. Now it's actually about eating those healthy fats and whole grains and really nourishing your body. So that is an amazing chapter or two in the book. And, the exercise thing is important, as I said, for bone strength, for heart health, cardiovascular disease, prevention of things like dementia. It all works together. And, it is a balance, finding, that kind of sweet spot. And as I've said before, some people don't have the luxury of time or money to be able to focus on themselves. But there's some really simple tips in there. And sleep, stress reduction. Really small, simple things you can do that cost nothing and take up very little time.
And so what's next for the Latte Lounge? What are you working on, and projects and initiatives that you've got coming out once you've survived the book launch?
Well, at the moment we've got a new project coming out soon. We've got a podcast called Midlife Matters Uncovered. This is slightly different. It's going to be a live show, so that will hopefully be coming out after this podcast is out, so look out for that. I'm also going to take some of my own advice and take some time out. I'm a busy mum with 4 kids and with a lot of demands, and I want to get my work-life balance a little bit more in place. And I feel that the lovely thing about the book is it feels very much icing on cake for me. It's now, no matter what happens, because a Facebook group and a website can't go on forever because it's quite a manual job. I just feel I've captured it all in the book now, so who knows. I'm also, one more thing is that I am actually organising a retreat day, a lovely away day in the spring summer for our Latte Lounge members, and that's to celebrate our 9th birthday and the launch of the book. And again, bringing some lovely experts together and doing some yoga and
that sounds fabulous.
Learning about nutrition, because we all need time out. And
yeah, absolutely. Katie, thank you so much. Before we wrap up with Grit and Grace, I'm going to take you through some quick fire questions, if that's okay, so that we can all get to know you a bit better. And there are 8 of them. Are you ready? So these are your top tips for living your best life. 1, if you could pick one skincare brand that you'd recommend for midlife women, what would it be? What do you use? Say anything. What's in your routine?
I have always, and I'm not sponsored to say this, I have grown up with Clarins because my mother always used Clarins, and it's just a brand I've just always loved, and yeah.
Perfect, Clarins. Favourite fitness or gym brand or things that you do?
Zero Gravity Pilates, I'm obsessed with.
Top wellness tip, if you could pick one thing that you do to de-stress, what would that be?
Walking my dog.
Favourite influencer or expert or doctor for menopause advice and support? Who's your go-to?
My lovely friend and colleague, Diane Danzybrink.
Favourite supplement for tackling menopausal symptoms?
Better Menopause.
Thank you. William Posey. That one beauty product you think every midlife woman should own?
Vaginal lubricant.
There you go. I like that. No one's answered that yet. One food or type of food that you think makes a difference to supporting health in midlife? Good or bad, actually?
Avocado.
Avocado. They're not very popular at the moment.
I love them. And they're...
Okay. And finally, guilty pleasure.
Theatre.
Okay, there you go. Not very guilty. Okay. Katie, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me on Grit and Grace.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for listening today, and thanks to our sponsor, The Better Menopause. For more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on socials. See you next time as I'm joined by more incredible guests here on Grit and Grace with me, Debbie Wosskow.